Well, I hope you've had a good week since our introduction to Habakkuk last week. And I hope you've taken the time to read through this little book. I would encourage you to do so if you haven't. And I would read through it 3 or 4, 5 times, 6 times to get the flow of it, to get the sense of it. It will help you to read it multiple times. And I would also encourage you to read it multiple times in different versions, the ESV, the New King James. If you're up to it, the King James, perhaps the NIV. It'll give you a different sense of a better understanding of how the translators have dealt with the text. But reading it multiple times in different translations helps give you a better sense of the context. And what we have here is Habakkuk living in difficult times. We don't know anything about him other than his name apparently means to embrace, which I think is fitting for this book because we see Habakkuk going from frustration to faith, from confusion and consternation to correction to composure. And his outside circumstances have not changed, but he has a deeper understanding of who the Lord is and that he can trust him. And so we want to take a look today at the Habakkuk's first 2 questions and then the Lord's first answer, because that kind of lays the groundwork for the rest of the book. And let's begin by reading just the first part of chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 1 through 4. The burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore the law is powerless, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore perverse judgment proceeds. And we start out with verse 1, is the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. This idea of burden it can be translated oracle, and it means to carry, but it's a technical term used in the scriptures to indicate that what follows, what is being spoken, is an oracle from the Lord. And often that oracle was ominous. It had some difficult connotations to it. It wasn't a cheery message. It was a difficult message. And so it's the idea of the prophet having to carry this bad news to the people. And so it's a burden. Now, if you've ever had to deliver really bad news that a loved one has passed away, or someone's lost their job, or some horrible conflict is taking place and you've got to pass it along to those you love, you feel the weight of that. That's the idea here, is the prophet feels this weight. And so the first thing he does is he's praying to the Lord. Apparently he's been praying for some time and he hasn't gotten an answer. And he has 2 questions. How long and why? First, in verse 2, how long? How long, O Lord, shall I cry? And this word is, Lord is the covenant name of God, Yahweh we would say. And you will not hear. Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. So his first part of his prayer is one that you and I have probably experienced many times in the past. How long have I got to pray, Lord, and not get an answer? I don't understand. How long, Lord? You love me. I'm in a covenant relationship with you because of who Christ is. Habakkuk is in a covenant relationship because he is a member of the kingdom of Judah, and he's a prophet. And he knows the law, and he knows their position before the God. He uses God's covenant name. And he says, why am I crying out to you and you're not answering? And then, why do I cry out violence and you don't do anything? You don't save. You don't act. I don't understand. So that's the how long part of this. And then the second part of it is why. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? He said, that's all I see. I look around, I see the iniquity of the nation and the people taking advantage of one another, and it's violence and strife and confusion and contention. And because these things have multiplied in the nation, then authority has no effect. It says, therefore, verse 4, the law is powerless and justice never goes forth, for the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds. So those are his 2 questions. How long and why? Why are these things going on? Why are you letting me see these things? It's frustrating. I'm confused. You are the Lord God of Israel and of Judah. You're our covenant God, and yet you are allowing these things to go on, and I can't get an answer. I don't understand. Now, Habakkuk is a contemporary, more than likely, of Jeremiah, and so he may have lived earlier than Jeremiah, but we think the scholars think he is contemporary of Jeremiah. So there's some indication that they would know that the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, are coming. But the Lord, when he answers Habakkuk, he gives him a pretty startling answer. Verse 5, he says, "Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days, which you would not believe, though it were told you. For indeed I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth, to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses also are swifter than leopards, and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead. Their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They have all come for violence. Their faces are set like the east wind. They gather captives like sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They divide every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. Then his mind changes, and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing this power to his God." So Habakkuk has asked this question, how long, Lord, and why? How long will you not answer? And why do you allow all this confusion and consternation and lawlessness to go on? And the Lord replies, and that reply in verse 5 is important, because he says, "Look among the nations and watch, be utterly astounded." You could translate this, "you look," and in the original that's the way it is. But the "you" is plural. He's not just talking to Habakkuk. He's talking to all those who feel like Habakkuk feel. All those who sense this question that he's posed before the Lord. He's answering the plurality of those who are faithful in Jerusalem. That would be my understanding of this portion. So he's answering, the word is plural. He's saying, all you who are putting your trust in me, who are questioning what's going on, you need to look and be astounded about what I'm fixing to do. I'm getting ready to blow you away. Not in the sense like chaff, but the idea is psychologically. I'm fixing to do something that's absolutely astounding that you won't believe, even if somebody told you. And he's telling them. And he's saying, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans. Now, the Assyrians and the Chaldeans were north of Israel. The Egyptians were south of Israel. So they were in a tenuous position politically and militarily. They had three empires surrounding them, but the Assyrian empire is crumbling. The Babylonian empire is coming to the fore, and they do it quickly. It's like within 20 or 30 years, the Assyrians crumble and the Babylonians or the Chaldeans come into ascendance. And so this is kind of a shocking development. But those in Judah would have known this, and they would have known the kind of reputation the Chaldeans have. And he says, look, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, verse 6, and I'm going to bring them against Judah. So Habakkuk is asking, Lord, why don't you deal with the trouble here in Judah? And the Lord answers, I am going to deal with the trouble there in Judah. You see violence, there's going to be more violence, because that's what they want. That's what I'm going to give them. In Romans 1, we see the Lord giving over those who reject him. He gives them over to a debased mind. He gives them over to sin. Basically, he punishes sin with sin. He's going to allow them to go into more difficulty. And it's kind of the idea here. They want violence. He's going to pour violence out on them in mass quantity. He's bringing the Chaldeans, and then he expands on that idea by talking about how the Chaldeans behave. They're bitter and hasty. They're impetuous. They don't care about people. They march through the land and they just take whatever they want. There's no compassion. They're very prideful. They're vicious. They're quick. Their horses are fast. They move with unbelievable speed. Their army does, and their cavalry charges without any fear. And they come and just wipe out nations without any difficulty. And they do it because they love violence, verse 9. Their faces are set like the east wind. They want to gather captives like sand. It's nothing for them just to heap up handfuls of sand, and that's what people are like. It's nothing to them at all. It says they scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They don't respect other authority. They're not worried about strongholds and siege mounds, because they set a siege against it and seize it. It's no big deal to them. In their day, you wouldn't bypass forts because the army that you're bypassing might come out and take you. They didn't care about that. They didn't follow the norms of the day when it came to battle, because they were so sure of what they were doing, and they were so powerful and effective in making it happen. So God's answer to Habakkuk and to those who feel the way Habakkuk feels is this: I am going to answer. I am going to deal with violence, and I'm going to do it by bringing the violence of the Babylonians on them. And this is not the answer that Habakkuk is hoping for. And so he starts up in verse 12. Is the next question Habakkuk has. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. This is what he says. What are you doing, Lord? You are our... we have a history with you. That's his idea. Are you not from old or from everlasting? The idea is we, your people, your covenant people, we have a long history. You've dealt with us from before the time of Egypt, going back to Abraham, our father. You've given us promises. You've delivered us from Egypt. You brought us you kept us in the wilderness. You graced us to conquer the promised land. You've got a relationship with us. And he confirms that. And he says, "O Lord," that again is all caps. In the translation, it means Yahweh. Yahweh, my God, my Holy One. He's feeling the covenant here. And he's being shaken by what the Lord's doing. And so he says, we shall not die. We're your covenant people. Would you destroy us in such a way? And then he says, O Lord, you've appointed them for judgment. O Rock, you have marked them for correction. You are covenant God. You've marked these evil ones, those who are so violent and don't acknowledge you, because he notices Habakkuk hears what he has to say in what the Lord says when he says in verse 11, then his mind changes and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. The Babylonians don't give credit to the Lord, that he's the one who's allowed them to be raised up, and that he's the one who's using them to conquer nations and to deal with Judah. They don't give glory to God. They think their God's doing this. And so Habakkuk's pointing this out. They don't listen to you. You've marked them for correction. And then he says, verse 13, you are purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours? Here's another why question. Devours a more righteous person than he. And that idea of more righteous is that Judah is in a covenant relationship with God, and righteousness tends to have an idea of relationship. They were in right relationship, but the problem was Judah wasn't in right relationship. They had been disobedient. They had flaunted the covenant. They had forgotten the God of their youth, and they had not obeyed when he had sent prophets. If you want to get a sense of this, I'd encourage you to read the prophet Jeremiah, a contemporary of Habakkuk, how the Lord just pleaded with them through Jeremiah to return to him and to remember their first love. And in chapter 17 he said, just keep the Sabbath. If you just keep the Sabbath and don't carry burdens in and out of the city. And they couldn't even do that. And so Habakkuk's perception, and though he's right, they have a covenant relationship with God, and by that they should be more righteous. In reality, they weren't. But Habakkuk keeps going in verse 14. Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them. They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net and gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous and their food plentiful. Shall therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart, and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. So we see this second question is to the Lord. His second prayer is, Lord, how can you do this? We're your covenant people. How can you bring in this violent, impetuous, godless, idolatrous nation who treats people like animals? How can you allow them to come in? Because they use their dragnet to grab people, and the Babylonians would do that. Their god was often represented as a fish, and so they would take these fish nets, big nets, and they would grab people up in them like fish, and they would drag them back to the city. So this was one of the things that these relief pictures you see where they were bragging about their conquest. One of the things is they just gather people in these nets and drag them along and just kill them by dragging them in nets. And by this conquering, they would get all the booty, all of the spoils of war, and made themselves plentiful. And so because they were able to do all this, they sacrificed to their nets. They sacrificed to their fish god. And so Habakkuk doesn't understand, Lord, how can you, our covenant God, use this group of people to come against us? But then he says something really interesting in chapter 2, verse 1. He finishes up with this. I know I don't understand. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. I know I don't understand. So I'm going to stand my watch. He's like a watchman standing on a wall to give warning to the people. He's looking for trouble. And I'm going to set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he, that is the Lord, will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. So we see Habakkuk has moved from frustration and confusion, and in the midst of his prayer he's got an answer that's confusing him even more. He doesn't understand, and he answers God very honestly. Lord, what are you doing? How can you do this? How can you use a people as vile as the Chaldeans to come against us? And he sees the Lord is using his circumstances in ways that he can't begin to comprehend. And so he's having to come to grips with his own inability to understand the sovereignty of his God. He's learning to embrace the sovereignty of his God. Embracing God's sovereignty doesn't mean we understand it, and nor that we understand all that he's doing, or that we even understand our God. But embracing God's sovereignty means we know he's good. It means we know we can trust him, and we know that he will give us an answer in due time. And that's what Habakkuk is doing here in verse 1 of chapter 2. He says, I will stand my watch. I will wait. I'm not going to get all antsy. I'm going to stand here and wait and see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. He knows he's going to be corrected. He knows that his understanding is faulty. And so he's learned to wait on the Lord as even as he's working through the questions and how perplexing they are. How can God use a hasty nation, violent nation like the Chaldeans to come against us? He's saying, I'm going to wait and see what the Lord has to say. So we see Habakkuk asking his questions in consternation. Why? How long? Why don't you answer me? And why are you doing things this way? And the second question, after the Lord has answered him and told him what he was going to do, he's going, why, Lord? Why would you deal with a nation? How could you do this? How could you bless their efforts against us, your covenant people? But he's beginning to see, as he ends this second part of his prayer, he's questioning God. He sees, I need instruction. I need the Lord to reveal to me what he's getting ready to do here. And the second part, the second answer the Lord gives starts in chapter 2, verse 2. And the Lord does answer his question. And the first thing he really says to him is, trust me, the just shall live by faith. But then he goes on to say, I will deal with them in a specific way and in due time. But I'm going to deal with Judah through them in the meantime. And so that leads us to chapter 3, and we'll look at that in a couple of weeks, where we see the questioning, the response to Habakkuk's correction is beautiful. So we start off this book with Habakkuk being confused. He doesn't get the answer he's looking for. He questions, and now he's starting to come to the point where I've got to wait and see what the Lord is doing here. And that's an important lesson for you and me. We can come to the Lord genuinely with real confusion, frustration, and anger. God is a big God, and he loves us, and he knows what's going on, but he understands that we're just dust. And so we can come to him and express clearly our frustration. That's what's encouraging to me about this book, is Habakkuk's not holding back. He doesn't understand. He's questioning God's methods, and he's questioning how long. Why don't you hear? Why don't you answer? He pours these things out. And we see this a lot in the Psalms, where the psalmist starts off with all these questions and frustrations. And he moves from that as he pours out his heart. The psalmist moves from that to submission, to humility, to acceptance, and to trust. And so in chapter 2, verse 1, we're seeing the start of that transition where he's gotten all this angst out, and now he's learning to wait on the Lord. And that's something you and I need to grasp. When things are difficult, when the sovereignty of the Lord doesn't seem to make sense to us, we can come and pour out our concerns to the Lord and ask him what's going on. But we have to understand that we're going to require correction, because we don't see everything God sees. And he could take one event and do a multiplicity of things with that one event. You know, I was thinking about this the other day, when if I were wanting to encourage a certain person in the church, let's say there's someone with a financial need, and I approach several people, and we raise funds to meet their financial need. And this person's been praying, and we give them the gift. We've done, let's say they have a great debt that they can't pay off. So we give them this money, they pay off the debt. We've done several things there. We've given the people who give an opportunity to minister anonymously. We've encouraged the person who is in debt and relieved their debt, and we've paid off the debt, the creditor who is wanting this money that they were owed. So all of these things are taking place by that one event, by giving this money to that person. That's just a small example. It does, that one event does several things and encourages people in different ways. God does things in ways that you and I can't begin to comprehend. He sees so many things. You know, he tells us his ways aren't our ways and his thoughts aren't our thoughts. And that's exactly right. We can't think the way he thinks, but we can trust him because he's good. And that's the lesson that Habakkuk is coming to. As we finish up this second question that he has before the Lord, he's starting to see that I can trust my God. I'm going to have to wait and see. He's going to answer me, and I'm going to be corrected. But I know that I'm learning to have to trust my God in the midst of these difficult situations. Judah's sin has to be dealt with. And God's going to deal with their sin and their violence by bringing a sinful and violent nation against them. He's removing his sovereign protections. But he's telling Habakkuk and those who are with him, look to me, trust me. You can trust me in my sovereignty. And so that's the lesson we want to learn today. We want to embrace God's striking sovereignty. It's striking because we can't always see what he's doing, and it astonishes us. It's astounding. It blows our minds. But we can trust him, even though we're confused, even though we get astonished by what he does. We can give him the glory, and we can trust him. So read through the rest of the book of Habakkuk for the next few weeks. Keep reading through it and follow along as we see how Habakkuk moves from confusion to composure at the end of the book. And learn to trust your sovereign God, because he does love us. Look what he's done for us in Christ. And just like Habakkuk, we may not be able to make sense of our circumstances, but we know we can live by faith by trusting in our God. So embrace God's sovereignty and trust him in your circumstances.